The cameras were rolling, the world was watching, and history was quietly being written in that glittering hall. Flags lined the backdrop, the United States, Canada, and a cluster of nations that rarely shared the same table. It was meant to be another ceremonial signing, another handshake for peace. But no one expected the moment that would define the entire event to come not from a policy statement but from a single slip of the tongue. President Trump, known for his off-the-cuff remarks, turned toward Canada's Prime Minister with that familiar showman's grin. And then it happened. "Thank you very much, Mr. President." The room froze for half a heartbeat. Cameras caught the instant flicker of surprise on a few faces. A small wave of awkward laughter rippled through the crowd. Yet in that silence, Mark Carney did something subtle, something powerful. He smiled, leaned slightly forward, and said calmly, "I'm glad you upgraded me to president." Great stuff. The laughter deepened. The tension dissolved. And in that effortless moment, Carney transformed what could have been an embarrassment into a masterclass in composure. It wasn't just charm. It was control. Because where most leaders would have stumbled, Carney stood taller, not by raising his voice, but by showing the kind of grace that commands respect without demanding it. What the cameras captured that day wasn't a gaffe, it was symbolism. In a world crowded by noise, Carney had become the quiet center of gravity. That slip of the tongue said more than any speech could. Mr. President wasn't just an accident, it was an unintentional truth. A recognition, perhaps, that in a room full of power players, the one leader who carried himself like a president, measured, confident, unshaken, wasn't the one with the biggest military or the loudest microphone. It was the Canadian.
Before moving forward, do subscribe for Parliament updates.
So you have Armenia and you have Bahrain, you have Canada. It's so great to have, in fact, the president called and he wanted to know if it's worthwhile. He knew exactly what it was. He knew the importance. Where's Canada, by the way? Where are you? Where are you? He knew the importance of this. He said, "I want to be there." So many people have done that. They called. I mean, they heard about it. And these are not people that can do that very easily. They have pretty big schedules, to put it mildly. The most powerful people. And I appreciate you being here very much, Mr. President. Fantastic. Thank you very much. So if we could ask the media to leave, and we're going to have a little conversation with all of these great leaders, which will take 5 minutes, and we'll just talk for a couple of minutes. But if we could ask the media to leave, would be great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. So you going back?
I'll go back. I'm glad you upgraded me to president.
Oh, did I say?
Great stuff.
As Trump continued speaking, the media shifted its lenses. They weren't just filming a peace deal anymore, they were witnessing a shift in global tone. Behind Carney's composed smile was a message: Canada was no longer playing backup. It was back in the main act. In the years since he entered politics, Mark Carney had slowly reshaped how the world viewed Canadian leadership. Gone was the image of polite neutrality and quiet following. In its place stood a Canada that engaged, influenced, and negotiated from strength, not through aggression but through credibility. Diplomats often say Carney doesn't need to dominate a room to lead it. He does it through precision, every word measured, every pause deliberate, every argument built like an architect laying stone. His background in finance gave him the discipline of data. His years in global institutions taught him the patience of diplomacy. And together they built something rare, a leader who doesn't chase headlines, he earns them. That's why, when Trump's accidental "Mr. President" echoed through the hall, it felt strangely fitting. Because in that moment, Carney wasn't merely representing Canada, he was embodying what leadership is supposed to look like in a century drowning in theatrics. Calm, intelligent, grounded. For a world exhausted by chaos and confrontation, the contrast was almost poetic. While some leaders thrived on spectacle, Carney thrived on steadiness. While others measured success in applause and likes, he measured it in results. It's not that he avoids confrontation. It's that he approaches it like a strategist, not a showman. When Trump raises tariffs, Carney responds with economic precision. When Europe fractures over energy policy, he builds bridges. When Asia looks for reliable partners, he shows up, not with slogans, but with solutions. That's what makes his rise so remarkable. He doesn't project power, he radiates it. Not through dominance but through discipline. And that's why the world noticed. Because that 5-second exchange, that simple "Mr. President" moment, wasn't about a title. It was about recognition. It revealed how far Carney had elevated Canada's voice, and how the world was starting to see him not as a national leader, but as something larger, a stabilizer in a time of volatility. Behind the polite smile and calm tone lies a mind that calculates risk and consequence with surgical clarity. Every move, every statement, every alliance fits into a long-term strategy, one built on restoring trust in institutions, rebuilding faith in democracy, and redefining how nations cooperate in a divided world. To his critics, he's too careful. To his supporters, that's exactly why he matters. Because while others chase momentum, Carney builds endurance. He knows that real leadership isn't about who dominates the headlines today, it's about who still commands respect a decade from now. That day, as the media's questions faded and the leaders posed for photos, Carney's calm presence stood out like a steady light amid a storm. Even Trump, never one to share the spotlight, seemed, for once, to yield a little of it. The headlines that followed tried to make it sound like a humorous footnote. Trump calls Carney Mr. President. But beneath the jokes, analysts and diplomats understood the subtext. The world had just witnessed something symbolic. It wasn't the mistake that mattered. It was how Carney handled it. Because in the age of instant outrage, when every word becomes a weapon and every slip a scandal, he reminded the world that grace is still power. That true strength lies in composure. And that diplomacy, the art of staying steady when everyone else is spinning, is the rarest leadership trait of all. And in that instant, Mark Carney didn't just represent Canada. He represented a different kind of power, one that doesn't need a throne, a title, or even correction. Because sometimes, being called Mr. President isn't about the office. It's about the presence. In the days that followed, the clip spread across the world. News anchors replayed it, analysts debated it, and millions online replayed that fleeting smile again and again. Some laughed. Others looked closer, realizing it wasn't just a funny moment. It was a reflection of something bigger. Because the truth was undeniable, when President Trump called Mark Carney Mr. President, the world didn't hear a blunder. They heard a truth that had been building quietly for years. Canada, long seen as the quiet neighbor, suddenly looked like the adult in the room. And Carney, the economist-turned-leader, had become the symbol of that transformation. No shouting, no spectacle, just steady, intelligent leadership in a time when those qualities feel almost extinct. Behind closed doors, diplomats whispered about it, not as gossip but as recognition. He handled it perfectly, one European official said. That's what leadership looks like now. Even Washington insiders privately admitted that Carney's calm was disarming. He didn't compete for dominance, he commanded through respect. In the weeks after the peace signing, Canada's standing quietly shifted. Negotiators from Asia, Europe, and the Middle East began turning to Ottawa for mediation, for partnership, for perspective. The country that once avoided headlines had become the place where conversations began. And Carney, ever composed, didn't chase the spotlight. He let his work do the talking. His message, that power today is not about how loud you are, but how much trust you carry, began to resonate across a world weary of confrontation. Even Trump's slip had become part of the story. In a way, it captured the evolution of leadership itself, away from theatrics toward thought. Away from dominance toward diplomacy. Away from the politics of noise toward the politics of purpose. For Carney, it wasn't about the title. It never was. It was about what the world saw in that moment, the reflection of a man who leads not by ego but by example. A man who represents a Canada that doesn't need to demand respect because it earns it. And as the peace ceremony faded into history, one thing lingered. The image of Mark Carney standing calmly beside the President of the United States, smiling through an unexpected mistake, turning it into a moment of unity. A simple slip became a statement. A laugh became a lesson. And a quiet leader became a symbol of what modern power truly looks like. Because in that hall, beneath the flags and flashbulbs, the world saw it, even if just for a second. Canada doesn't follow anymore. It leads.
Canada debates.